We are beginning Exodus. We've finished our journey through Genesis. Now we're starting in Exodus this week, and Exodus is just what its name implies, that it is about an exit. The children of Israel, Abraham's descendants, having been enslaved in Egypt, are freed by God and led out of Egypt through the wilderness into the promised land. It's a long journey. It's a long process. It's difficult. It's challenging. It's heartbreaking for everyone at some point or another in the story. And we're going to be looking at this story over the next couple of months now, and seeing the lessons that God has for us in this Exodus account of the Israelites leaving Egypt. But we're going to begin today by reading Exodus chapter 1, verses 6 through 14. Joseph and all of his brothers and all that generation eventually died. But the Israelites were fruitful, increased rapidly, multiplied, and became extremely numerous, so that the land was filled with them. A new king who did not know about Joseph came to power in Egypt. He said to his people, "Look, the Israelite people are more numerous and powerful than we are. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. Otherwise, they will multiply further. And when war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So the Egyptians assigned taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them with forced labor. They built Pithom and Ramses as supply cities for Pharaoh. But the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied and spread, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. They worked the Israelites ruthlessly and made their lives bitter with difficult labor in brick and mortar and in all kinds of field work. They ruthlessly imposed all of this work on them. May the Lord add His blessing to the reading and hearing and living out of His word. Breaking free, living free. That's what Exodus is about. Breaking free from what enslaved the Israelites and living free after they broke free. And those are two distinct things. You know, the living free requires the breaking free, but the breaking free does not necessarily end in the living free. And we'll get into all of those kinds of things later. But today, we're really going to be looking at this business of how the Israelites became enslaved, why they became enslaved, and God's response to His people being enslaved. And just, you know, I'm sure you can guess by. And by the way, it was pointed out to me that I have misspelled enslaved on this slide. I read that slide at least 500 times. It took a long time to figure out that slide, and I still misspelled something. So I'll fix that for next week. But compassion for the enslaved is God's response. But we're going to see how we get to all of that and what that means for us in our situation. Before we get into the Israelites, though, I want to really just say a word about slavery as we're talking about slavery today. Because the book of Exodus was written about people who were bodily, physically enslaved, chattel slaved. Their bodies were controlled, if not legally, at least virtually owned by their Egyptian taskmasters. They were told what they could and couldn't do. They were forced to work for the benefit of other people. They were required to kill their own firstborn or their own sons when they were born to help slow their population growth. They were treated brutally, ruthlessly by their Egyptian taskmasters. There is not a person in this room, myself included, that understands what that life is like. We have no comprehension because we have not lived it. And that's just a simple reality. We can talk about it, we can think about it, we can try mentally to put ourselves there, but we'll never really understand what it means to be owned by another human being who has absolute power of life and death over us and over our family and can dictate and demand whatever they want from us, and we can't do anything about it. Now, there are people in the history of this country that have that experience, that had that experience. The slave trade that was at first the transatlantic slave trade, and then, you know, once that was stopped, the slaves that were born and passed on as chattel, as property within the United States, Africans, then African Americans, they understood that. They found great hope and great comfort and great power in the story of the Exodus as what led to their eventual political liberty as well as their spiritual salvation. But none of those folks are alive anymore either. None of them. There's not a single person alive today who was enslaved in the African slave trade and in chattel slavery in the United States in the early part of this country. All of those folks have passed as well. So we as we're reading this story and looking at this story, we need kind of a dual look at everything. That the story was originally written about people who were in actual physical enslavement, physical human bondage, and they're breaking free from that. But if that's all it's about, that can't be all that it's about, because if that's all that it's about, then this story really has nothing to do with us, little to nothing to do with us. But the simple fact is there are many, many, many ways to be enslaved today. Many ways besides being owned. There is still slave ownership in this world. It's, countries still do it. Nations still do it. They don't shout about it because there's such disapproval of it. And so it's not necessarily easy to get hard and firm numbers, but the last number I read, which was just this past week, is that right now in this world there are 26 million slaves. And not slaves to alcohol, drugs, that kind of stuff, but people who are actually owned by other human beings, whether they are enslaved for physical labor or for sex trafficking. 26 million. That is not a number to sneeze at. We're going to come back to that a little bit more, but there are many, 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 many ways of being enslaved. Social media, phone, tablet, computer. A lot of folks find themselves enslaved to that. They can't put the phone down, can't turn the TV off, can't shut down the computer. There's a highly sexualized culture in which we live. That things that used to be very discreet and hidden are now just very, very public. And it's not surprising that we see more and more people enslaved to sexual kinds of behaviors and sexual kinds of compulsions. There is alcohol and other drugs. And alcohol is a drug. It's a legal drug, but it's a drug. Alcohol and other drugs that enslave people. In very dramatic ways. You don't have to spend much time with an active addict to understand that they're enslaved and that all that really matters to them is getting their next drunk or their next high or their next fix or next whatever. Modern day highly processed foods. Going to talk about this one a little bit more later too. But foods that have been designed to help us and encourage us to ignore our fullness signals so we keep eating even after we're full, leading to obesity and all kinds of other health problems. Modern day highly processed foods. Gambling, very readily far more available even than it was when I was a kid. It's easy to gamble now, and easy to gamble legally now. Easy to gamble illegally too. But gambling is hugely addictive, and people find themselves enslaved to that excitement, of that risk, of taking that chance, of maybe this next one will be the big score and be the big win. Looks maxing. I got a lot of cringy looks from the teens when I used that word at Chester this morning, but looks maxing, if you're not familiar with looks maxing, it's a new name for a somewhat new thing, but it's really just a variation on an old thing, and it's really first was used and applied to men, now men and women, but looks maxing is taking seriously the notion that how we look and appear is really one of, if not the most important things about us. And the most important thing that we have to worry about is how do people perceive me? Am I perceived as beautiful? Do I look as good as I can look? And so you have men and women doing things as radical as very extensive surgeries to adjust facial structure and bone structure and these other kinds of things to max out their looks. They're enslaved to the perceptions of others and cultural definitions of beauty. Advertising, including for goods, services, and politics. Now, I know advertising doesn't affect you. It doesn't have a hold on you. You can see it and you can ignore it, but the person next to you struggles with advertising. I promise you. We all think advertising only affects other people. No one can believe ads. Ads don't really influence us. If ads didn't influence us, corporations and politicians would not spend billions of dollars every year on advertising. Ads work. They do their job. They motivate, they inspire fear or worry or anxiety and all, desires, greed, all of these different kinds of things. Advertising works, and we can become enslaved to the advertising, whether it's of goods, services, or politics. Ideological echo chambers, we can become enslaved to those as well, where we are so committed to certain ideological viewpoints, whether it's political or economic or even religious, that we only really listen to people who agree with us, because just hearing someone who strongly disagrees with us or even is opposed to us can make us anxious and angry and upset and leave us with sleepless nights of worry if we hear these different viewpoints on different things. And so we listen to those who agree with us, and we ultimately become enslaved to that. Lifestyle, envy, greed, ambition. Got to have the right house, got to have the right car, got to have the right amount of money, got to wear the right kind of clothes. People have to perceive me as being successful and doing well in life and having, being prosperous and wealthy and happy. And I gotta show this lifestyle. And social media is another big driver of this right now, where people make their lives look wonderful and perfect online, no matter how messed up they are when the cameras aren't rolling or on the other side of the camera. But we see it and we think, what's wrong with me that I don't have that? We become enslaved to these things. Debt might be the biggest enslaver of human beings in the world right now. Debt. Once we're in debt, we're not working for ourselves. We're working for someone else. And debt has enslaved individuals. It's enslaved families. It's enslaved communities. It's enslaved entire nations. There are nations in this world that will never get out of the debt that they are in. And I'm not even talking about the United States and our massive debt. We at least have some remote possibility of getting out of debt because we still make a lot of money. But there are some smaller nations that are in deep debt that they'll never get out. Not as long as that debt stands over their heads. Debt is an enslaving force in this world, and sex trafficking is one of the big ones in this world today. It's a huge thing in the world. And the United States is, I believe, still the number one destination for sex trafficked people, boys and girls, women and men. Toledo, one of the busiest sex trafficking points of entry for any landmass in the world, is Toledo, Ohio. Slaves. People are enslaved to so many different things. And of course, as followers of Jesus, we recognize that we are all born into slavery to sin. We can't escape it. We can't buckle up our willpower and just try harder. And, I've heard someone say years ago, and I cannot remember the guy's name. He's someone I respect. But he talked about, he was talking about sex addiction at that point. He said, of course sin is addictive. If you don't think sin is addictive, try stopping. And he's absolutely right. I've never known anyone that could just stop sinning. We are slaves to sin. That's why Jesus came. That's why he lived and died on the cross, to break us free from slavery to sin. So there are many, many, many different ways to be enslaved. That's why this story in Exodus is a foundational story for us. A foundational story of God's people enslaved and God's response to his people's enslavement. God's people enslaved. How does God respond to that? What does God do in those situations? And that's what we see in the book of Exodus. We see God's people enslaved and God's response to their enslavement. And the fact that we have so many different ways that we can become enslaved makes this Exodus story so important for us to chew on and process and internalize, because it's about our situation too. Even though none of us in this room has ever been owned by another human being, as far as I know, we still find ourselves enslaved to things. And God's response matters. One of the important things about God's response to his people's enslavement is Israel was never blamed for their enslavement. This is important. It's something that might seem so obvious that you don't even think about it, but it's incredibly important. Israel was never blamed for their enslavement. There's no point. Now, there are places in the Bible where God tells his people, look, you're experiencing bad things because you did dumb things, and that's why you're in the mess that you're in now, because of this thing that you did. Their enslavement in Egypt never treated that way. There's never God saying, my goodness, I cannot believe you let yourself get in this situation. I cannot believe you didn't stand up for yourselves. I cannot believe you didn't walk away when you had the chance. It's just amazing. Why in the world didn't you fight back? Why didn't you resist this? Why didn't you? None of that. Israel is never blamed for their enslavement. And their enslavement, it's difficult to know. There are different places in the Bible. There's a place in the Bible where it says they were slaves for 400 years. There are also places in the Bible where it talks about generations of people that we know that if those generations are accurate, then it looks like there's no way the slavery could have been 400 years. We don't know for sure, but we know this, it was a long time and it was multi-generational. It went on for multiple generations, maybe as much as 400 years. And God never looked at them and said, this is your fault. What's wrong with you? Get yourself out of this. Stop being lazy. Exercise some willpower. Show some backbone. Stand up for yourselves. Never. Never. But if Israel wasn't to blame, then how did it happen? How did Israel become enslaved? How did the Hebrews become enslaved in Egypt? We're going to look at those verses right now. A new king who did not know about Joseph came into power. The first step of how Israel became enslaved is that the people of Egypt, including their leadership, forgot their own history. They forgot their history. They forgot that Joseph, a Hebrew, an Israelite, had saved their entire nation from destitution and death during the 7 years of famine. They forgot that Joseph was so honored for saving the nation of Egypt that not only did the Pharaoh lift him, elevate him in honor and glory and dignity, making him second in command in the entire kingdom, the largest, most sophisticated kingdom in the known world at the time, and Joseph received such honor, and not just Joseph, but his entire family. When the Pharaoh found out Joseph's family was nearby, he said, bring them all. We'll give them the best land in the country. We'll give them the land of Goshen. They can be there, some of the best, most fruitful land in the country. To honor Joseph, we will honor his family. They forgot that. Honor and shame were deep parts of the culture of the world at that time, and particularly that part of the world. And to honor those who have been a blessing and an honor to you was an obligation. But the leadership and the people of Egypt forgot their own history. They forgot that the Israelites were people to be honored and respected and cherished because of what they had done to bless the nation of Egypt. Now, they didn't know. They didn't have the Bible. The Bible wasn't written yet. And we know they didn't know, although who knows, maybe Joseph at some point told them the stories. But that God had promised Abraham. Remember, every nation on earth will be blessed through your descendants. Every nation on earth. To have the Israelites, the children of Israel, within their borders was a promise of divine blessing. And they could see the Israelites prospering, the Israelites growing. They were doing great. But because they forgot their history, instead of looking at the Israelites and honoring them and respecting them and blessing them, they looked at them with fear and suspicion and mistrust. Let's read on. Look, Pharaoh said, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and powerful than we are. Come, let's deal with them shrewdly. We'll get back to the shrewd part in a minute. Otherwise, they will multiply further, and when war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. They forgot their history. They saw this group of people prospering and doing well, and they looked at them with fear and suspicion. that was completely unfounded, completely unwarranted. There is nothing in the Bible that suggests that Egypt had anything to fear from the Israelite presence in their nation. But they looked at them with fear. They'll betray us. They'll join our enemies. They'll leave us. And then we won't benefit from the things that they're doing. We want them here. We want them working for us. We want the benefits of their labor, but we can't trust them with any kind of power. We must control, dominate, oppress, own them in every meaningful way. And to do that, we're told that the Pharaoh, the king himself, said, we've got to deal with them shrewdly. That word shrewd is interesting. It has the connotation, it's really, the root is wisdom. Let's deal with them wisely, but with a negative connotation. And it also has to do with dealing with them skillfully, again with a negative connotation. Think of, I have one of the things that keeps cropping up on my feeds these days are videos of people that are targeting online scammers. They find people that are, using phishing, whether it's emails, or they get people on the phone, they get them to hand over control of their computer, then they get control of their computer and they steal money from them and all different kinds of things. And there's some people that are out there, computer experts, that fight against that. They call it scam baiting, and they get the scammers on the line and then they invade their computers and mess them up and turn their information over to the local police wherever the scammers are. It's really cool in an awful sort of way. But you watch a few of those videos and you realize those scammers know what they're doing. They're really good at what they do. They know what to say and how to say it to get people to turn over personal information that they ought not turn over. They know what to say and how to say it to keep people on the line. They know what to do and how to use the computers. Those scammers are dealing shrewdly with their targets. If they were idiots, and hey, give me your password to your computer. Well, I'm not going to do that. They know what they're doing. They're smart. They're skillful. They deal shrewdly with their targets as they bilk them out of money. This was Pharaoh's plan. We don't know exactly the elements of the plan, exactly what they did step by step along the way that led the Israelites from being at one point in time a free people to, by the end of it, an enslaved people. We don't know what the steps along the way were, but we know that they acted smart. They didn't just go up and say, hey, we're going to enslave you people. They dealt with them shrewdly and enslaved them. Dealing with people shrewdly, the devil's good at that too. Devil's many things. The devil is not dumb and the devil is not lazy. He knows what buttons to press to enslave us with sin. The people around us in the world that don't have our best interests in heart, a lot of them deal very shrewdly. The king dealt, and that's how the Israelites became enslaved. Not because they failed in some way, but because powerful forces looked upon them with mistrust and suspicion, forgot their history, and shrewdly maneuvered them into positions of slavery. That's what happened. Israel was never blamed for that. Never. That's important because there's a lot of enslavement that happens in the world around us today. People enslaved to sin, people enslaved to all, that whole list of things plus more that I had on there. Israel was never blamed for their enslavement. What does that have to do with us? With that in mind, the fact that God never blamed Israel for becoming enslaved, let's take another look at present-day enslavement. There's slavery in the world. Like I said, 26 million was a number I found this week. Countries like Qatar in the Middle East, some other Muslim countries do this as well. They advertise in desperately poor nations and communities in Africa and in Southeast Asia. And they promise jobs, make $400 a month, which for us is not a lot, but for those folks, that's a lot of money. It's worth traveling a good chunk of the way around the world to get that job. Promise good living conditions, good pay, safe work. You can send money back to help support your family. Those folks arrive and they're employers, they're actually their masters, take their passports, and they're never allowed to leave again. They can't leave now because they don't have their passports. They can't travel out of the country. They can't travel freely within the country. And everyone there knows what's happening and knows what's going on. I read a report this week, someone who was traveling in Qatar, and they were at the airport, and there was a group of black women all huddled together in a separate line, waiting to go someplace. And the person who happened to be a black woman said, well, who are those? And the folks she was traveling with said, oh, they're slaves. It's just open about it in country. They're slaves. And no one thought anything of it. People enslaved in that way today. The girls and boys, the women and the men who are groomed and forced into sex trafficking in many countries, including in the United States. Baited and groomed. The groomers are shrewd. They know what to say. They know how to say it. They know the buttons to press. They know the levers to pull on to get people to do things that put themselves in vulnerable positions. And then before long, those vulnerable people no longer have a choice about what to do with their own lives. They are enslaved. And they're trafficked sometimes on other parts of the world, all around the world, and never seen or heard from again by the people that actually love them and care about them. Those enticed into highly processed foods, alcohol, drugs, gambling. Here's one. So the highly processed foods thing, this is one of those stories. It's horrible. In one sense, it's really horrible. On another sense, I find it utterly fascinating. So I apologize. I'm going to be smiling, and it's inappropriate for me to smile, but I just find this fascinating. But the simple fact is, obesity is a problem. Not just in the United States. It used to be more of an American problem. It's becoming a problem all over the place. And generally, the human response is exercise some willpower. Don't eat so much. Exercise more. Eat better food. Eat healthier. Exercise more. That's why you're overweight. That's why the problems come from. That's where it is. What if we think about it a little bit differently? Or, rats. Anyone here keep rats as a pet? Nobody? Good, because then I don't have to worry about being nice, saying nice things about rats. Rats are vermin. They eat, they destroy, farmers. Nobody likes to have rats in their house unless you're one of those people that keeps rats as a pet. Rats, on their own, eating their normal, natural food that they find for themselves, do not get obese. Even when they have a surplus of food, they only eat until they're full and then they stop eating. That's just the way rats do. You don't find obese rats in the wild. Well, some smart people got some rats and they brought them into captivity. And instead of feeding them their natural food, they fed them human food. Foods, just ordinary stuff. Foods high in fat, high in sugar, high in salt. And those rats ate until they were obese. They didn't stop eating when they were full. Why? Because the people designing our food deal shrewdly with us. And they know the more food we eat, the more food we buy, and the more money they make. And they design our food to help us ignore our fullness signals so that we don't even notice where we just keep eating. We just keep eating. I bought a bag of Dandy cheese puffs on Friday. Big bags. I love Dandy cheese puffs. I thought, I'm going to make this last a whole week. I got that much left. It's not going to make it through tomorrow. I can't stop them. There's nothing, just air. I just eat, and I eat, and I eat, and I eat. Our food is designed that way. Our beverages are designed that way. The people that do it are doing it on purpose, and they're doing it shrewdly so that we buy more. We buy more. We become enslaved. Those groomed into looks maxing. Oh, I'm sorry, no, I missed one. Those enticed into lifestyles driven by envy, dependent on greed, ambition, and inquisitiveness. The forces around us of advertising and social expectation for what kind of car, what kind of clothes, what kind of backpack you have to carry at school, what kind of folder you have to use, what kind of house you live in, what kind of haircut you have to have, all of these different things. that require to spend more and more money on more and more stuff to stay up to date with the latest trends because, by golly, I can't not do that. And that's true for adults. It's true for kids. This perception of the lifestyle that we have to have. The lifestyles that we live in this room is beyond the lifestyle that the King Henry VIII had in some respects. Most of us don't have an army at our disposal and live in a castle, but he didn't have hot running water in his house either, and a flush toilet, or a big screen TV and cable and a computer, or air conditioning. Oh, air conditioning. We have to have more and more and more and more and more. And the part of the reason we want more and more and more and more is that there are people whose job it is to make us want more and more and more and more. And as much as every individual thinks the advertising doesn't affect me, it does. It does. It affects you. If it doesn't affect you, at least know it affects the person next to you. So just for sure. Right? Those groomed into looks maxing. I've got to look a certain way. I've got to look my best. If I don't have the perfect facial structure, if I don't have the perfect body fat ratio, if I don't have the perfect muscle mass, the perfect abs, the perfect whatever it is, the perfect hair, perfect eyebrows. I've never understood the eyebrow thing. I've never met a guy that said, man, I love those eyebrows. But now guys are doing it too. Plucking and pulling and waxing and everything to make themselves fit some cultural expectation of beauty or good looks or masculinity or femininity, and we become enslaved to those perceptions and those expectations, doing incredible things to our bodies to try to fit into someone else's expectations. Those hooked on TV, movies, gaming, social media. My goodness, the folks who design social media, they deal with us shrewdly. The algorithm, those folks are not stupid. They know TikTok, Facebook, they know the formula that will keep you scrolling and keep me scrolling, and they do it, and it works. And it's true for TV. It's true for TV watching has changed over the years. Our attention spans have gotten smaller. Netflix has figured this out. And so new programming on Netflix, original programming on Netflix, they almost always have the hook in like the first 3 minutes of the show. So if, say, it's a murder mystery thing, the murder might not happen for another 30 minutes, but they'll flash forward and show the murder in the first 3 minutes, because they know if you're not hooked in the first 3 minutes, you're going to switch off and go to watch something else. And then they'll spend the rest of the time catching back up to what they showed you in the first 3 minutes. And that's intentional. Netflix requires that on most, if not all, of their original programming, because they know how to keep us hooked. They know how to keep us watching. Here's the thing. Can we look at them, the folks enslaved in this way, in all of these different ways, us, without blame and with compassion? Can we do that? Israel was never blamed for being enslaved. Can we look at the folks enslaved around us who are enslaved, and we're all enslaved to sin, ourselves as well, with compassion rather than blame? In other words, can we look at them and us like God does? This is how, when God saw his people enslaved in Israel, this is what the Bible says. The Lord said, I indeed have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out to that land, into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. God looked on his people enslaved, not with blame, not with judgment, not with condemnation, but with compassion. Think about it. God could have said to his people, how could you have allowed yourselves to get enslaved? What does this say about me as a God, that you've allowed that my people are enslaved? Why didn't you stand up for yourselves? Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you trust me to fight against your enemies? And say, none of that. None of that. Not an ounce of blame, 100% compassion. for his enslaved people? Can we look at the enslaved people around us the same way that God looked at his people when they were enslaved? Can we look at ourselves that way? Not with blame, not with judgment, but with compassion. Because that was the first step in God's people breaking free, was that God looked at them not with judgment, but with compassion. And I believe God invites us to do the same. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.